I was gonna say stupid, but actually I made it legal.
Scandalous. Maybe you do have.
That would be.
Oh.
Yeah, go into that one.
I mean, it's recording anyways, so whether it's live or not is,
Don't have to hit that record button.
it doesn't really matter. No, it's recording already internally,
Okay.
and I guess we could check on our computer, but it doesn't matter because it's recording. So,
Okay. Is it broadcasting?
well, that was my question.
Yeah.
I'll check it on YouTube right now.
Or streaming?
Or streaming, yeah. I just followed what she said to do, so. Yeah, one watching live. Yep,
Good.
we're live. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for coming. Unfortunately, Jamie couldn't make it, and Carolyn's not feeling well. Back from work and Carolyn's not feeling well. Welcome. Happy to have you here to listen to our conversation today. I will, for future meetings, put together an agenda. But I didn't get to it. I mean, like an agenda where you know, citizens' comments, call to order, citizens' comments, voting on the minutes. So we'll just wait to vote on the minutes to the next meeting when we have everyone had reviewed the minutes for the June and July meeting. And then we will have August minutes as well. And those are really the only formal parts of it, of the agenda. But today I wanted to just discuss this document, which is a summary mostly of what we talked about last meeting, in terms of how we understand our objective overall, what our vision is, and then how to break that vision down into parts, particularly individual projects, possible projects, or themes that could take any number of forms. So I'm really open just to jumping into the discussion of this document in terms of anything that struck you, that we want to elaborate, that's exciting or wrong or what have you. Any other opening comments? I guess I also tried to think about the archaeological aspect of many of these projects and goals, noting that archaeology might not be part of everything, of course, can't be part of everything, but is there a way to think about archaeology in any of these? Also, as I said at the beginning, that out of last week's discussion, there was most excitement about thinking about how we cultivate the town's historical identity as it is lived and experienced by current residents. Also, I'm realizing I should be reading this out a little bit because anyone who's going to watch this recording is not going to have this document. So
Yeah,
it's good just to say, you know, that the purpose of this committee is to promote research into the history of Waldoboro, to form a deeper understanding of its ongoing effect in the present, the ongoing effect of history in the present, from pride of place to planning and development. And then thirdly, to cultivate this historical identity as it is lived and experienced by residents today. And as a committee, we were thinking about how we might focus on that last bit, cultivating the town's historical identity as it is lived and experienced by current residents. That might and will involve some mode of research and continuing understanding of the effect of the past on the present as well, the other parts of our purpose, stated purpose. And last meeting, we also Jamie reformulated more colloquially, a general question that guides our work, and that is, what does it mean to belong in Waldoboro, particularly as a place with a past? Thinking about Waldoboro as something that exists across time. So what does it mean to belong to Waldoboro in that way? And I feel like we pose this question in this way because it allows us to think about continuity over time. So, Waldoboro is a place that's existed in one space over time, but many different people have come through and are living here today. And many people who lived here once no longer live here and don't do the things that used to be done here. So belonging is a way to kind of gesture towards the thing to which you belong that's continuous over time, but also that there might be many ways to belong to that historical entity called Waldoboro. And then the rest of this document suggests some different approaches to this question of what it means to belong in Waldoboro. So let's just jump into thinking about those. But the last thing I'll say is that the three sections or the three approaches are one, thinking about who are the people who were here before us and what your relation is to them. Number two, do you walk in their example or do you diverge from it? How much are we living in the same way and how much are we living differently, but in a related way? And then thirdly, are there other ways to belong to Waldoboro in the present that are historically rooted, but maybe not as developed as some of the ones that we're familiar with, or visible as the ones that we're familiar with? So with that, I'll just open up to any comments or further ideas that you may have. What is it an accurate assessment of our last discussion, I guess, would be one way of thinking about it.
Yes, I think so.
One of the things that came to mind while I was reading this and you were talking, each of the each of the three areas, I think there's three,
Yeah.
Cemeteries,
There's these different relationships.
the things we were talking about doing, the projects. One was cemeteries, one was this anti-slavery, slavery, Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
And the other one was education?
Religion?
Religion, thank you.
Yeah.
So under each of those, you do an archaeological aspect. I think it might be helpful. I think all those three things are great starting points. And they feel like big projects that we could have lots of interesting things to find out about, but also manageable. Like the cemeteries, I can see us starting with that. Or, the religious things, I can see us starting with that. You gave each one under there an archaeological aspect. I think we ought to include, whatever projects we do, an archaeological aspect, an educational aspect. That ought to be an underpinning of everything we do. How do we incorporate not only educating residents, but using students?
Yeah, exactly.
Which was Jamie's big point last time that I thought was really important. So there should be an archaeological aspect, there should be an educational aspect.
Yeah.
And you say this up here somewhere, maybe there should be a planning and development aspect.
Okay.
How can what we do be applied towards
Thinking about
enhancing Waldoboro economically, developmentally, and that should be something we consider. And so those three elements.
Yeah. Obviously this is a working document. And so what I'm hearing from you also is just the importance of trying to articulate each of those aspects. So
No matter what we do.
no matter what we do. So it's like, maybe it's, we don't know exactly what it would look like. The planning, the insights into planning from this cemetery project, but at least always trying to ask that question to figure out to try out language
Exactly.
and just to test ideas, because we don't know what it could look like.
But
So
what are the archaeological
yeah,
potentials of looking at the cemeteries? What are the educational potential for students and Waldoborians,
Yeah.
Waldoborans? And
yeah, and then
the plant,
Yeah.
how can we use that to enhance tourism or enhance business or enhance whatever,
Yeah.
planning and development?
Mhm.
And that could look like we have a cemetery map that we can keep in the town office and people could pick up and with landowners' permission, go look at graves. And
yeah,
the educational aspect, we would have a handout about who's buried there and have students do a genealogy on that particular area. Anyway.
Mhm.
So I liked your document a lot, but I think having things to focus us,
yeah,
give us focus is,
yeah, the more specific.
Yeah.
Especially when we try to incorporate other partners such as schools
Mhm.
to say, well, this is what we were thinking as a possible project. Now you tell us what would work.
Yeah.
You know, for in the classroom or with teachers and students, but for them to see that it's couched in a larger vision on the town side, I think will give extra energy and impetus for the schools to be involved or for businesses to be involved. Were you gonna say something, Bill?
No, I just agree. Education, I think, to me, is the big key, especially for the younger generation. I mean, I've said it before, you've heard me say it. We all hear the stories, we pass them along, but when somebody passes away, those stories are lost forever. So you gotta educate the younger ones. So I think education's a big bullet point. that we
Yeah,
need to touch on.
that makes sense, and it's good. That's good to hear that we're all seeing that as very important. And I'm glad we have Jamie on the committee who
Yeah.
thinks about.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at this link to the cemeteries project at in Aroostook County.
Yeah, I brought, I
Aroostook.
was looking at it for the
Horistic,
Thank you.
The county.
the county.
county up north.
And I mean, it's amazing, you know, I mean, and I know other, you know, places around the United States have done stuff like this, but yeah, to build out a database of cemeteries that is sort of interactive.
You can have theater. I mean.
Oh, you could have
Yeah.
have performance in so many
you could
ways.
Click on the QR code and Sarah Higgins from 1872 could start talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, all that, you know, demands a lot of work.
Yeah.
And a lot of infrastructure.
Yeah.
But I think it's good that we're aware of that possibility. And if we're just constantly returning to the most important themes for us, you know, maybe we would decide to focus a lot of attention in one area that could yield something as large as that, you know.
And even if you broadened on that, like that one was just the cemeteries, but you could do all of Waldoboro. You could
Yeah.
have, you know, the fishing thing, you know, like you could expand off of that sort of platform. I thought that was a great website.
Yeah. Yeah, you could do so many different kinds of sites in Waldoboro.
Yep.
So many different kinds of positions, you know, like standing here, although it doesn't look this way, but before blah 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 blah. I think that's ultimately what we would want to, you know, you'd want to do. So in this, and number two, when I talk about in whose path or example, you know, do I walk today? How might I diverge? I was thinking about these different relationships. And yeah, what strikes you all in terms of what, I mean, they're all important. I mean, you know, the native relations between native people and the early settlers are so important because it's a question about longer American history, the development of the nation. But we can ask it in very specific ways through the history of this region of Maine. And I think, you know, with the question of relations with Native people, it's not just about natives versus Europeans, but it really opens up questions about land use, ownership, you know, defense, things that we could relate to today amongst, you know, between neighbors, you know, that are first sort of worked through and felt through with native people, but actually are questions that come up, you know, when new people come to town as well, you know.
That's how I read that. I mean, that could be 400 years ago, or it could be last week.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And that,
You're native,
Yeah.
been here for forever. I'm from away, right? So that
Right.
tension exists even
Yeah.
today.
yeah, exactly. And of course we're not saying that Bill is like a Wabanaki tribes person. What we're saying, but what you're pointing out is though that the emotional dynamic might be resonant between these relations.
Well, given the shift in there was something I was reading about the new tax base or the new tax assessment for the upcoming property tax, and how as taxes rise, maybe people who've been here forever are having harder time paying taxes. Newcomers are coming in. It's very much like, again, I go back to when you talked about the fisher versus the shipbuilders.
Mhm.
The shipbuilders would, yeah, the people coming in who aren't from Waldoboro, myself included, and owning property that others might have owned because I can afford it, and maybe somebody else who'd been here for a long time can't. And that creates a lot of it changes the landscape of Waldoboro because you're changing who can live here.
Mhm.
And it also brings tension between, you know, how can I be a good citizen and a good neighbor not being from here without turning into, you know, I don't want Waldoboro to become, I moved here because Waldoboro was Waldoboro. I don't want it to be
Hmm.
different.
Yeah.
And that's the same tensions that you see
Yeah.
throughout history of Waldoboro, sometimes religious based, sometimes native versus European, sometimes the fishing weirs versus the shipbuilders, but it's the same thing that's going on today.
Yeah.
And I think history tells us a lot about what we're experiencing now.
Yeah, I completely agree.
People can't afford to rent house or apartments here anymore.
I mean, what's sort of most interesting too about what you say, and actually most so difficult to conceptualize, is the conflict, the inherent conflict that arises in the situation like yours, which is that you don't want Waldoboro to change, but you are part of it
Part
changing.
of it changing.
You know, so there's no, and this is the case over time anywhere. You know, like things change. That's just like how, but how we think about power and money are pieces that we can, I think, highlight in a much more informed way, you know, as they resonate over time to give some kind of perspective.
But I also think one of the missions of this committee is to honor and elevate the past here so that people don't feel forgotten, lost, pushed aside, which I think can happen. That when we honor the history of the land we walk on, the native history, the fishing history, the et cetera, I think it's incumbent upon us to honor those people and recognize them and give them a voice.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's kind of like thinking about, I'm just thinking about cemeteries again, you know,
Right.
and how,
That gives people a voice.
yeah, like, you know, people die and also certain ways of living pass as well. I mean, just because, you know, the world isn't organized that way anymore, but is there a way, instead of just saying, well, the economy is different now, how do you sort of remember, memorialize, you know, other ways of life before you?
It's having value.
As having value. And I just was just thinking that like
Yeah.
that's what cemeteries do for people. And I wonder if there's that was sort of when I was thinking about the archaeology and how do you mark an archaeological site? You know, sometimes there's these, you know, signs or plaques or something like that. But I was just thinking, what if you thought about that marking more as a kind of memorial, almost headstone like, because it brings with it, as opposed to just a sign saying, this used to be a blank. Thinking about it in terms of a memorialization brings with a value in life, and something that is like eradicable, even though it's gone. You know, there's a sacredness
Right.
to then an archaeological site that an individual's own passing would have. And I wonder if we could think about the sacredness of past ways of life
As peoples.
and past people, that's that idea of value and sacredness cuts across all these different things from the past. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this idea of the native new settler relations, I think opens up onto so many productive ways of thinking about contemporary issues. You know, I mean, I know wars are fought elsewhere and not on this soil anymore, but families do experience trauma and loss from that. And it does shape politics. It does shape how they see themselves in a civic structure. And I think that it would be wise to think about how that has happened before here. Even though, as I say, the wars are fought elsewhere today. And then also under this question of relationship between Native people and new settlers is cooperation. You know, I mean, there's a lot of research now that's done about how, well, it wasn't so clear cut, these two cultures, that and over time they are living around each other, and there is modes of working together, modes of collaboration, things that of course, that the settlers learned from the native first people here. And I think that's as much of something to highlight throughout time, this cooperation, to highlight as much as the tensions between as well. And so I feel like it opens up to both ends of that, of neighborly relations. And then the second one here is relationships between different religious sects and belief systems, which let's just talk briefly about that. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? You know, because it is true that statistically more, you know, fewer and fewer people are identifying with churches. So that is a major difference, I think, between now and any time before. Yet churches and religions do have an outsized impact on social issues, public conversations, and politics.
Well, and they certainly did in the New World. I mean,
Yeah, even more so.
even, yeah. So, I mean, part of most of, I don't want to say most, you know, the eastern part of early America was organized around religious beliefs.
Yeah.
And certainly Waldoboro, the first settlers, I guess, were Moravian
and Lutheran.
Right. So, and I think that's how people lived when that,
Yeah.
I mean, everybody went to church whether they wanted to or not. I mean, it was just part of the expectation and culture.
Yeah, and the particular relationship between the Moravians and the Lutherans, two different types of Lutherans here in Waldoboro, is really important for who was in power and how at the very initial stages in terms of affecting the growth of the town, development of the town. And I would love to think and do something more about the Moravians. Again, as soon as we finish discussing this, I do want to sort of ask people then, like, say, of these three, what is sort of rising to the top. And the Moravians, it probably feels very distant for people because it's like, well, you know, they were here for only like a few decades, and then and you know, I don't even know if there is a contemporary Moravian church. I don't know precisely if there is in that form, but certainly not maybe here.
Oh, there is in the United States. I don't know
Yes.
here.
Yeah. But America, you know, is in terms of religion, is important in regards to radical, you know, religious experiments. And the Lutherans who were here were pretty conservative. They weren't interested in forming a new society. But the Moravians were radical. And I found a book recently in a used bookstore, and the title is the reason that I got it, and it was called yeah, the title of the book is "Jesus is Female: Moravians and Radical Religion in Early America." And I have a copy of it. It's absolutely fascinating. I almost think that we could like read the introduction and pair it with, Bill, that new translation of, there it is.
You wanna
Pair it with
share it?
a translation of George Sewell's historical account of the Moravians at Broad Bay. So George Sewell was one of the first Moravian ministers who came to the area to preach in the 1760s. And this is the first full English translation of his journal written in German. And he talks about his relationships with the Lutherans. He talks about his acceptance among others, and their rejection of him and Moravian beliefs. Reading that, you wouldn't know, what are these people fighting over? You wouldn't know. But what you get in this historical document is like, oh my God, they're fighting, and there's really tense relationships. Reading this scholarly account, you're like, okay, the Moravians were really saying that you know, who was Jesus? Is you know, what is the gender of God? Should belief be more, you know, personally defined and experienced rather than set down by one minister in a dogmatic way? So the argument of this scholarly account is that the Moravians were interested in maybe in a more egalitarian understanding of belief. They troubled hierarchies that existed among the Lutherans. So here you have in Waldoboro this extremely pointed and useful case study of two different ways of thinking about religious power structures. That is a example of the larger conversation happening in colonial America at the time. So again, it's like at first look, you're like, why is this important? But actually, when you dig into it, you're like, wait a minute, you know, maybe the reason they're disagreeing touches on some things that animate today discussions among not just religious people, you know?
Make it not just an interesting conversation. We would have to find graves or the site of the old Moravian. We would
Yes.
have to find
Yes.
something.
Yes, and I wrote the archaeological aspect here was
Yeah.
to identify sites of the first
Right.
Lutheran and Moravian churches, and we more or less know where they are, and we know that they were next to each other by happenstance, because the person who gave to the Moravian church land to build the church was a lot next to where the ferry landed, which was why the Lutheran church was put at, near where it was, because it was a thoroughfare through town. So these, of course, at that time, everyone's living on top of each other anyways, but Yes, you're right. I think to make it tangible.
Right.
And then the third one here is about pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions, which again I think is something that's not talked about so much on the surface. But you know, as Jasper Stahl writes, like pretty comprehensively, you know, about how anti-slavery politics defined the power structure in town. I mean, you can just look at the votes that when when the other towns were voting.
Pro-slavery,
Yeah, sorry, what did I say?
anti.
Okay.
Yeah.
Waldoboro as being pro-slavery,
Right.
so the people in charge being pro-slavery, or wanting you to vote for candidates who were pro-slavery, compared to other area towns. And of course, that's tied up with the economy of shipbuilding. And also just, you know, wanting to be in charge and not lose power and all sorts of things. So, you know, that's obviously it's an important thing to recognize anywhere in United States history. But it has a particular history in Waldoboro, but I also think it's important to highlight this pro-slavery side that, you know, as Stahl also remarks, that the escaping slaves did pass through Waldoboro and were harbored in homes here on their way to Warren, which held the site of an all-black community in the 19th century of free blacks, people who had escaped from slavery. And I know that there are descendants alive that are still part of that community in Warren. Yeah. So, you know, and that's the next town over. So think about it. Arriving in Waldoboro is the last stop before you heard that there was a community of black freed people that you were going to live in, which would be first time that you would be living in freedom among all black people. So I don't know, and the fact that it, you know, went through here and, you know, documenting where slaves were kept as they escaped is notoriously difficult, if not impossible. And it's always put under suspicion because people like to claim that they have a site on the Underground Railroad. So there's a lot of robust work around how to talk about that. But we do, you know, but Stahl writes about it, and we also know that Sebastian Marble, who became governor of Maine, he became anti-slavery in the 1850s, you know, before the Civil War. And he had moved to Waldoboro by that time, I believe. I think he was like working as in a law office. He wasn't governor at that point. So there were public people who turned against the establishment in Waldoboro, became anti-slavery. So there's a story to tell there. Again, it's, you know, what's the purchase today? Other than it's simply like grand narrative about American history and slavery and freedom, which is fine. But also I always want to know how is that felt today in Waldoboro? You know?
I think I had brought this up originally because one, I find it really just historically interesting, but I find it interesting that Waldoboro is still on the mid-coast, a much more conservative town than many. And there's something about Waldoboro that has stayed sort of separate from surrounding.
Yes, I think that's descriptively true. And my interest has always been, it's like, yeah, why is that?
Why is that? Right.
And also, you know, conservative meaning different things over time.
Right.
And yeah, I think but
it's interesting why this little piece of the mid-coast, I guess Knox County is much more liberal. Is that correct? Votes more Democrat. You're not sure. I think, and then Lincoln County tends to be Republican, I think.
Certainly this town statistically has tended towards being conservative or pretty divided.
Right. And I just find that very interesting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also find that there's not a whole lot of, like, we don't talk politics with our neighbors. We just get along with people.
Yeah.
Which is also interesting. Like, I don't ever ask anybody, nobody asks me, and we just all get along.
Right.
As far as they may talk about me behind my back, but
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, yeah, for me, the question of like, conservative and what that means over time is so kind of holds contemporary resonance and does connect with this 19th century moment.
Mhm.
But of course, it goes before that too. You know, it has to do with German settlement and people wanting to stay ethnically pure.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about Germans versus English. We're not talking about
Right.
native people versus Europeans. Um, and I think it was very unusual that you had a sort of cohesive, all-in-one German settlement here, because nowhere else in Maine did you have that. They all otherwise ended up in Pennsylvania. Um, so that is one reason. That's like a kernel to what became a certain kind of conservatism, I believe. But it allows us to think about conservatism in a way that's not freighted by contemporary notions of, oh, you mean people who believe this, this, and this.
Right.
No, I don't mean that. I actually mean something about how you respond to circumstances in life, you know, a certain kind of an ethical sensibility that could be really good in the moment or really bad, as so a progressive could be not the right move to make in that moment, or the, you know,
Which is about the tensions in, again, in Waldoboro about development versus staying the same.
yes, this also relates to that.
Anyway,
Sorry, do either of you have comments on either of those?
Good.
So okay, so just thinking then briefly back about these different relationships, like the native settler one about, you know, all about land use and affordability and cooperation versus tension between neighbors. I know some of these things are going to overlap. Number two being religion, and different ways of thinking about religious authority and spiritual structures. How Waldoboro is really important to think about that question more broadly. And then thirdly, about, yeah, politics, basically, progressivism, conservatism, thinking about that through the particular pro-slavery history of Waldoboro. Do any of those sort of rise to the surface to you in terms of something that we want to think more about first over others, or is more rich or robust? Or, I mean, we could let it sit too. I was just wondering, now that we've touched on them, if
we apply our three principles to cover,
yeah,
you know, you got the religious one, the education. I mean, the archaeology is there. The education one, I think, would be a great topic to cover and build on. Personally, I'd never heard of the Moravians before coming to these meetings. So
Yeah.
I think the education is
yeah, just the fact that no one knows.
the interest. Someone may be religious, may not be, but finding out about a whole new religion that existed here and
Yeah.
all of that, I think would be fantastic.
plus you can kind of, if we know where the churches were located, if we've got it's something tangible. Whereas the other things, the natives versus new settlers, I don't know. Well, maybe the garrison that.
Yeah, garrison would be, I think, definitely a part of that
tangible
first one.
thing, Yeah,
Yeah, that's the garrison side of a garrison.
because I think we've got to be careful that we actually focus on things we can do something with.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I guess though the third one is massively interesting.
Yeah, but
It's less
it's
tangible.
less tangible.
Okay, that's a good way of, so, and sorry, were you gonna say
Yeah.
something else about, okay. Okay, so archaeology, but planning and development, or thinking about, you know, I don't know, businesses and just historical identity of the town. How would that apply to the first one about settlers, and or neighborly relations versus the religious one?
Planning and development, if there is a garrison, is that correct?
Well, there are
Few.
Yeah, there were 5 garrisons.
Are there like ones that like look like something that you
No.
can visit?
That's the problem with like basically all our.
I've got I found a list about a year and a half ago at the museum. There's one down in Dutch Neck.
Yeah,
Across from the Mamie Benner Community Building, there's a dead end road. And J. Malcolm Bada owned the house at the very end. Well, down in that field, supposedly somewhere, was one of the garrisons. But again, you just can't go
Go dig.
walking on somebody's land and. But I did have a gentleman come to the museum that's interested about some Dutch Neck history. And he's actually friends with people that own that house now. And I told him the story, so he was gonna be that liaison to see if they would give permission to have somebody go down and maybe do a dig or a test pit or something. So the door's cracked open.
Yeah. Where did Harbor find one? In Waldoboro?
I don't,
Didn't he dig at one?
at a oh, maybe on,
Oh.
the Coonies.
Yeah,
Oops.
that one. Yeah, that South Waldoboro area.
Yeah,
That's not accessible.
no, nothing is except, everything, I think. What public land is there in Waldoboro that is even,
But some people
I
might.
know that's.
well, other than
Yeah.
that, no, I know.
Yes, there is, but like, I mean, I don't know how many people, Bob Butler. Selectman Butler, Harvard did a dig and he made it public knowledge that
Yeah,
Harvard was there. And that's always one of those things that we try to stress to everybody, that Harvard and the ones that know about it. Keep it to themselves, cause you don't want people just showing up on your
Digging,
property.
yeah.
And that misconception, and that's still a heated subject to this day since we started this committee. I've heard people say, well, they just ain't gonna show up on my land and start digging. Well, that's not the purpose of this committee.
Of course not.
So unless the landowner reveals it, then it's kept under wraps.
I wonder if
And-
the second one, local churches might
yeah, I know that, yeah.
be, and that's a way of.
There's a
planning.
lot of churches in Waldoboro,
Mhm.
and I think it would be very interesting to think about a project that involves all of them.
Is there a predominant religion? There's the big Baptist church up near Moody's.
I think it's split Baptist and Methodist.
Methodist
And I don't
left
know-
and went to French.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know the numbers for each church.
I
It
would
be
say
interesting.
probably Baptist is the biggest denomination in town.
And then the others are just smaller, non-denominational.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it would be great to include everyone,
Everybody.
everyone in
Yeah.
that, and, yeah. Harbor is doing a dig on our land, and,
Okay, you said it.
I did. And it's finding stuff having to do with military occupation, native settlement, and working people on the water. So there you have, 3 layers of time in one space. So we're thinking about, talking with Harbor about how to use that site. I mean, even just as it's a committee, we could go
Yeah,
down there
yeah.
and talk about it. But that could get into any of these questions with number 1 in terms of relations between neighbors and also native people. I actually want to bring up one thing. I was reminded, actually, Carolyn wrote me a note, and she took a picture of a sign that the Old Broad Bay Family History Association put up, earliest land grant. It's on Gross Neck Dutch. You probably passed it. Yeah.
Yep. I don't
Which
know.
one's that?
Earliest land grant, the west bank of the Madomic
Yeah,
is
that's-
associated with the first names of immigrants in Waldoboro history. Humphrey Farrell and Morris Chalmers held title to grants extending from Farrell's Marsh between Gross Neck and Mainland to the Great Falls. Okay, dated 1673. So she sent me this, and then I was thinking about the sign, and I thought, that's interesting. Because you know, first of all, it says Waldoboro when Waldoboro didn't exist for another 100 years after that date. So
It's called Broadway.
yeah, although even then it wasn't called Broadway because this is 1673. So that's 17 mid 18th
Okay.
century. And most of the people who lived around the spot where these two men held deeds were, this is me now writing, were probably killed by native people or retreated to islands just after this deed was created, based on the year and the wars, the French and Indian War. Sorry, way before the French and Indian War. Earlier native and colonial wars with the colonists happening here. They would not have stayed in this far up from the water. So they would have not been there much time after that, or returned after the war settled down a little bit. More important, there's no mention here of the presence or absence of native people integral to the existence of this deeded land. Because I went to Stahl's history, and he mentions these two men's names on page 55 in volume 1, where you can see that the deeder of this parcel, the person who gave this parcel to these two people, was a native person. So deed by Indian Sagamore Arawaganat.
That's
So
fascinating.
now that's a complicated relationship going on here, right? So you know, there's a lot of work about what does it mean for these native people to be deeding land. How much did they know? How much did they not know? But none of that is on that side, right? So really, what's going on is something about relationships between native people and the
Well,
earliest colonists.
And it just erases the entire native person, like that they
Yes, they're
didn't
not mentioned.
exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So-
you know, so there may be many more intersections between native people and early colonists that we don't know about because, well, Stahl didn't write about them,
Right.
or they're just in a deed in the archives. So I just wanted to say that, okay, so maybe there are other flash
Mhm.
entry points, tangible entry points for this first one, but okay, so we can come back to both of those, but that's a good sort of initial discussion of that. I wanted to touch on this third piece here. I know some of it sounded a little crazy, but
Oh, just real quick. Have
yes,
you
please.
heard the book Here First?
No.
All right, it's the story of Pemaquid. And
Yes,
when
okay.
the English came in 1607, and it touches on Samoset. His whole time frame, and they actually get into
I've heard of the book, yeah.
deeding. Samoset was the guy who
Yes.
wandered into Plymouth speaking English
Mhm.
Yep.
in like 1621, and they all
Yep.
said, "What the heck is this guy?" It's a great book written by a main author. I'll look it up.
Yes,
Quick, kind
I
of.
remember seeing that, and I think you introduce an interesting question because as you go back in time, we would have to be basically thinking about this area more broadly as a region.
Yeah.
So like you really got to start thinking about, well, Pemaquid.
Yeah.
And because eventually people are moving up from Pemaquid to to the other side of the river, certainly the Dutch neck side. So we should just keep that in mind about like and I think, you know, going back and back and back, really thinking about foundations, origins, all these questions that we're going to have to sort of expand our orbit of thinking about the area beyond the boundaries of the town, which is they're not set till 1773. And I think that can be quite empowering also for people to feel that, well, the history of the place is as much about Pemaquid as it is about Main Street, you know, and that what happened there really is affecting what happened here. So that's a good, entry point into that.
I've got
Yeah.
an idea about, so what historical potential can be found here to belong? I think maybe something tangible, historical, educational planning and development is if we could sort of go back to the origins of marine life and the fishing here, starting with natives,
Mhm.
because you've got there's middens around.
Yeah.
You know, what was the aquaculture like originally? How did it progress? The fishing weirs, what does that look like now?
Mhm.
And that could be an interest, and I think that would planning and development in terms of focusing on Waldoboro and the shellfish that we have here.
Yeah.
Certainly focusing on clamming, education, and archaeology. Can we find, you said on your land you found fishing settlement or fishing,
Well, we don't know what work they did, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
That's the hardest question always.
that could be a concrete, tangible thread from the native population who
Yeah.
lived here and clearly lived here because of the abundance of
Yeah.
the water,
Resources.
the
Yeah,
and fish
resources. And obviously it's like a hugely important issue in terms of changes in the Gulf of
And that
Maine.
thread can carry all the way through to now.
Did Harbor tell you, he must have told you about what he thinks is that Native American rock where they was taken.
Yes. Yes.
So
That-
that's proof there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's proof on the site that he's working
Yeah.
on at our place. Yeah.
So that might be if we went back to the well, that could be an interesting thread to
Yeah.
follow.
Right.
So that's sort of number 3.
Yeah. The other thing I want to sort of think about / avoid is also, this is back to your point about like, what is the tangible remain, or where might it have been? How do we get people to keep thinking about place specific understandings when you're walking around a place, as opposed to going to a museum and seeing a nice exhibit, So like, as you explain this, I was like, oh, that would make a really great exhibit in a museum, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that's what you're suggesting, but going back to your point about
a story.
Yeah.
And
then how do we tell that and encourage people to like literally get on their feet and go to the beach,
Right.
go to a shoreline.
let them,
Yeah.
I know you can't do this, but take the school kids and let them dig for a clam.
Yeah. Can you do that?
Can you?
I think we can.
They don't have to have a license.
I don't think-
Dig them up and just like.
I don't think they're gonna dig a pack. I mean, you gotta have a license for that.
But I mean, ways of,
Yeah. But
Well-
yes, go ahead.
This would kind of go with what the Waldo Theater's gonna do at
Oh,
the
yeah.
museum next year with the schoolhouse,
Yeah.
right? The theatrical, bringing up the kids, and they're gonna, I can't remember, Mia,
Yeah. Mia Bronco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
they're gonna do a,
They're gonna do a reenactment of what it was like to be in school
Cool.
in 1890 using the Bog Schoolhouse on the grounds of the Historical Society. So that is definitely something that we as a committee will want to like be a part of,
Yeah.
tap into, whatever. That has to do with definitely the history of schools and education here, which interestingly actually for some reason did not come up in our discussion yet.
Yeah.
I'll just add that as something to
Yeah.
think about, because obviously schools, public schools, private schools is a big question here and elsewhere. So it could be another theme that sort of escaped our notice just in the last meeting, but could rise somewhere to the top. I don't know. I'll make a note about it to bring it up. The other thing I also want to mention is, how important different kinds of farming are in Waldoboro, beyond just the water, right? And I think that we should really be always thinking about what other kinds of farming are happening, because I feel like being on the coast, certain kinds of farming get like short shrift in the public attention, because it's all about like the water.
Mhm.
But, Waldoboro is very large geographically, and most of it is
Right.
not on the water.
Exactly.
And so if we're talking about the sort of lived historical identity of people and how most people are not living on the water. And I feel like we need to, if we were to do that, we would need to do the same thing, or as part of it is changing uses of the land over time. Go here to see this kind of farm, go here to see this kind of what happened to this field, go here to see what a field looked like after 100 years of growth.
Right.
After 30 years of growth, that would
Was
be
it
cool,
mostly
actually.
sheep pasturing or?
Over time?
Yeah. Holy
I think it's
crow, yeah.
all different kinds of things, but the problem is, the soil here is like not good soil. So
Right.
you're never gonna have, like industrial scale
Yeah,
farming to the extent you would in the Midwest. So it was always smaller.
more homesteading kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then of course what happened is that couldn't compete with the industry that did come to Maine, that was in factories, and related to the power of mills, mostly on the rivers that, are not where we are. So, we did have a few big factories over time, but not as many as like Lewiston and all these other places.
Thank goodness.
So that means it was tough, economically for many people.
That has to be directly related to the size of the Madomic River. If it was as big as the Androscoggin, then we'd
Yeah.
be
Yes.
Correct.
a lot
Yeah,
bigger.
you'd have a lot more of the factory.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And let's just touch on briefly, I think it's important to also always be thinking about just the mix of different kind of people who live here, year-round residents, summer people, but also artists, like creative people, and like how are they fitting in over time? The Maine has been a place where people have come to create, because they feel like they have more freedom to do that here, more space to do that here. So it is a quality that is embedded in the place.
Well, I'll say this publicly, but Andrew Wyeth painted on our property. And,
Yeah.
there's lots of that kind of history around here
Yeah.
that people don't know about. I mean, we were flabbergasted and excited and
And a lot of people have personal relations with the Wyeth family. And that art and the people and buildings it portrays are a part of people's lives, families' lives still.
but from Erica
Moody.
thank you. And her art that she does in town. And yeah, I think that's a great idea
Yeah, again, I mean,
to think about. Waldoboro is, it is a place where it's not Camden. So you can come here and have space to create and room to move and
yeah, space to create and room to move, yeah. And I also had this idea, I was walking on the street, thinking about the shops of Waldoboro, like how so many people have like garages where they make things or where they sell things, and maybe it's like fixing a car, or maybe it's making like some, metal work. There's a common theme in all of that, I mean, that's also a good idea for like a historical society exhibit or program
Yeah.
one day too.
And I liked your idea about, every time there's a post, I guess on Facebook, of looking at Main Street, what it looked like in 1910 or 18, whatever. I'm fascinated by what businesses were here and what buildings were in town and all of that sort of thing. What did we look like? And
Well, it's so true. It's just like the more information people see, the more connected they are. It's like, it's like I wish we could do all these things, like, yeah, could you imagine like you go to a site and you can like move the cursor and the Main Street like changes appearances over time, and you see like all of a sudden, even just very simply like general store, like they disappear, and then one thing comes back 20 years later, disappears, and you can really get a feeling of like, oh, this was a moment of all this stuff, and then there was 30 years of that, and then I think even just seeing that, just knowing that, begins to deepen and strengthen a connection to a place,
And I've had that conversation with Willie Wong,
Yeah.
and he says he can do it.
Yeah.
And him and I are going to try to pick a location in town with a photo that we have at the museum from 1920 or whatever.
Yeah.
He takes that picture and then he finds the exact location
that's
and
fabulous.
make an app, and supposedly they can,
Yeah.
you have your own virtual walking tour.
That's
You take your
fabulous.
phone, so you're just looking at the building now, and then when you click, up comes the old
That's
picture.
fabulous.
So I've had that conversation. He's the tech guy and
Yeah,
I think if it can work, he can make it
Like the
work.
community pharmacy building, you know, what's it say on the side of it?
Rexall.
No.
On the end,
Yeah,
yeah, there used,
there's
Craig's,
a circle thing.
Craig's Pharmacy. or-
yeah, I mean, it used to be something up
Yeah,
there.
like who was that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what was that?
Right.
And
Well, it's like, I didn't make the meeting last month because I was at an auction that had 4 movie posters in the auction. 3 of them was Waldoboro Theater,
Mm.
which I've seen and we've got some, the theater's got some. But the 4th one was of the Star Theater. And the museum had 1 Star Theater piece. You don't see Star Theater stuff much. So that's why I went to that auction. Of course, it wound up being item 237 of the
So it couldn't
300.
make the meeting.
I sat there like, I guess
Now, Star Theater, was that like upstairs of the,
Star Theater was around the corner from the pharmacy. There was a building there, bowling alley and a pool hall downstairs. And the theater was, Star Theater was upstairs.
a movie theater.
Yeah, and a stage,
Stage
they
performance.
did
it would have been
performance.
mostly that.
Okay.
They had a lot of, they brought in there was a lot of talent, outside talent.
Huh.
Like country western acts.
Touring shows coming
Yeah,
through town.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
They were really big in the late 30s, early 40s. So a lot of people didn't know
Had no
that there
idea.
was a
Yeah.
theater there.
yeah, I mean, even I mean, where the Waldo Theater is today, you know, that was the site of young Isaac Reed's mansion and
Mhm.
where the customs house, yeah, where's this like apple orchard, or there was an extension of
There was the whole.
end of the
orchard.
block, yeah. So that house is there until 1936, when the Waldo Theater is built. I'm assuming it's there until it was destroyed because
Taken down for the theater.
for the theater,
right,
yeah. So, and Isaac Reed was one of the most conservative politicians in town. So everyone would have known that name. So what does it mean in 1936 for a building that was associated with the political machine in town to be taken down, and in its place this state-of-the-art theater
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
people, right? I mean, that is a, like, if you were there, you would experience that change visually and experientially walking down the street. So that would be something to create with a
Yeah.
kind of app that
Yeah.
shows you can actually see the different time periods, and then we can create content around that.
And recently we had that emotion with the AD grades, the old
Yeah.
Waldoboro High School being
Yeah.
toward that.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much to do that. You go back in time and say, well, like, what about the church that stood there?
That's right.
It was very important.
To tear that down to build a high school.
Yeah. Yeah, and now a high school to build an apartment building
Yeah.
for elderly people. So, okay, I don't want to keep us any longer than necessary today, but anyone have closing comments or just anything in review? I will kind of begin to sort of reformulate things based on our discussion today.
Is there, you would know, one,
Maybe.
one cemetery and available to like get started with something?
Uh,
I mean, one that's
There's a
kind
lot
of
of
in need of
cemetery-
work.
A place where you can still read the names on the stones, needs some work, and might be a starting place to research. Who was that person? I guess what I'm getting at, it doesn't have to be the cemetery. I know we don't have a time frame on any of this, but to think about, is there some place we can start with
Yeah.
something?
Yeah. At the museum, we've got a publication that a gentleman named Larry Gross put together many years ago. And he was big into genealogy. And he made a cemetery, basically, and he hand drew the pictures of where all the cemeteries in each lot. I mean, I could bring that next time and maybe look at it.
I wonder what the oldest,
We've tried through the Historical Society for the last couple of years to do a thing with the German church group that
yeah,
maintains that to clean up, do a program on cleaning stones. Well, we've been 2 years trying to get a little cooperation to do it, so.
like a Memorial Day, which is a
Right.
traditional
Yeah.
day to
Yeah.
do that.
And we wanted to teach people how to clean
Yeah.
stones properly.
And then they can look at the dates from the
That's right.
1700s.
So 2 years ago, it didn't work out. This year, it didn't work out, so I'm not giving up. We'll see if next year we can make it happen, but again, you're dealing with another organization and the big word is collaboration. So if you got some members of a group that don't really wanna work with you,
Could we
you try to
invite,
find another place.
could we invite someone from that committee to our meeting? Because if we're,
Sure,
Yeah,
because if we're talking about the German Moravian, Lutheran Moravian thing,
well, yeah. Yeah, although it's interesting to think about, I mean, the German church organization, I mean, primarily sees itself as there to preserve the building,
you're right.
right? They don't see, do they
Right.
see themselves as a religious organization?
I don't think they do that.
Yeah.
It's just that there is, you go back to personalities and you got emotions. And there's some people on that organization that's been here forever. And they're rich in the family history that dates back to the original shipbuilders.
Mhm.
And they don't kind of see, I don't know, it's a strange subject.
Well,
really
again,
is.
though, that is also a subject for us. I mean,
How to make them,
yeah, like, I mean, part of the purpose of this is just to kind of give some overall thematic structure to these conversations that are happening at the organizational level. And so if we maybe, make these larger gestures about, well, we want this to happen because we're interested in how people feel like they belong in Waldoboro today. Maybe that will help,
Right.
move some of these things along.
yeah, we don't want to take it over.
No, I think that again, part of our purposes could be just offering a kind of overall entry point structure, thematic structure, and move on individual projects. But all I would say with that now is like, I'm okay with having a few more, meeting and just like feeling it out amongst ourselves. And then really getting going with something like once the spring comes, so that I think that this kind of table work is important part of this.
There is one cemetery we probably could check out. I don't know, down Meeting House Cove. Have
Mhm.
you ever gone down, and looked at that one?
No.
Right at the intersection, Gross Neck and Dutch Neck.
Uh-huh.
Before you go to Gross Neck, about the 2 telephone poles before you turn. If you look quick, you can just barely catch, there's a sign in the woods that talks about the first meeting house.
Yeah.
And there's a little cemetery right
Huh.
there. With an
Maybe
old
cemetery.
sign, that's one we can walk right into. That might be one to go down and look and maybe clean it up.
Mhm.
And get the names of the people. I think there may be 5 stones in there, maybe 6.
Okay,
That would be a good
I
one.
made a note of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me just double check everything else I wanted to say. This is not a committee event, but it's related to the history of Waldoboro, is that I am leading and the co-organizer on the 19 Towns, 19 Stories local Waldoboro event. That's a project that's addressing an opioid epidemic in Lincoln County. And we're having it at the Sylvania site because post-industrialization connected to job loss and opioid crisis. And I'm going to be talking about the history of the site, but also Waldoboro history and how the history contains feelings of being left behind, but also hope, struggle, and change for the better. So that all of these emotions that we're experiencing today were experienced before us, and thinking about that also as a way of feeling rooted and creating a sense of place that might be harder for people who are struggling with basic needs. So that's on August 30th, Friday Art Walk, 7 p.m. And we're going to also going to be on display art for a possible mural, maybe public art project having to do with the history of Waldoboro. And so those sketches will be on display there for people to look at. Obviously something that we would be involved in if any of that goes forward. But just wanted to mention that.
Is it just opioid?
It's about drug substance abuse more broadly,
Broadly,
and
okay.
also actually just the struggles people have and how they overcome them.
Okay,
So there'll be a few people speaking about struggles that they've had and how they've overcome them living in Waldoboro. And there'll be music and art and history.
cool.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's at 7 on Friday, August 30th. Okay, so with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Anything else? We good?
That's great.
Good. Okay,
Oh,
all right.
interesting.
Thank you, everyone. I'll stop the recording and then you can say whatever you want. Let's see, wait, don't say. Yeah.